Welcome to Module 4, Threat Modeling and DPIAs. This is actually the heart of privacy engineering. Everything so far has been preparation. You know the law, you know the data, now we hunt. Threat modeling is the practice of systematically finding privacy risk in a design before it ships, which ties directly to the concept of privacy by design. Now, Lindon is that framework that turns that hunt from vibes into method. This module also contains your first hands-on exercise. You threat model a realistic application yourself before I show you my own findings. Please don't skip the exercise. The skills only becomes yours by you practicing it. Threat modeling is 4 questions asked, but asked with discipline. Number 1, what are we building? Here we model the system. Usually this is in form of data flow diagrams showing processes, stores, flows, databases, and trust boundaries. Secondly, what can go wrong? Notice here it is highlighted. This is because this is where the real work lives. In this stage, it enumerates threats systematically against every element identified in the first step. This is actually where Lindon ends its cape. Thirdly, what do we do about it? It's not just helpful identifying what we're building and what can go wrong without identifying what can go wrong. Now, in this stage, we are going to prioritize and mitigate. We can mitigate using methods like redesigning the whole system, using methods like minimizing controls, or even at times explicitly accepting the risk. Lastly, did we do a good job? At this stage, we verify and revisit when the design changes have been completed. Now, security engineers have run this same similar loop for decades using Stripe. What Lindon does is that it runs the same loop but asking a different set of questions. It's not asking how do we protect the asset like in security, but it is asking how could this system hurt the person. Lindon, L-I-N-D-D-U-N, is a mnemonic for 7 privacy threat categories and is developed at the KU Leuven and is now the de facto standard. You can learn more about, I'm going to drop a link to the original paper where Lindon was published and advise you all to have a look to get deep insight about Lindon. Now, let's start from the first L, linking. Linking is associating data or actions to the same person, assembling profiles across different contexts. Identifying, this is singling someone out of supposedly, for example, an anonymous data. Remember in Module 3 where we talked about re-identification attacks, this is where it actually lives. This is where re-identification attack lives. Non-repudiation. A person can deny an action. For example, a feature in banking, a threat for whistleblowers and the vulnerable, for example. The next you have detecting the existence of record leaks. For example, an attack on an addiction clinic system that says plenty before any field is read. Next you have data disclosure. This is exposure beyond what is needed. The classic over collection and over sharing is a typical example. Unawareness. This is when people can't see or control what is happening. Decision is being made on their behalf without them knowing. And then lastly, non-compliance. This is the catch all, connecting back to everything. This is when something clearly violates a law or policy or user expectation. So with Lindon, we are going to threat hunt against each of these 7 systems that I've just mentioned. Now, a threat generally is abstract, right? Until you can actually name the harm, right? Because the fact that there's a threat doesn't necessarily mean a harm exists. So the goal of identifying a threat is to also name clearly what the harm is. Now with privacy scholarship, this privacy scholarship gives us a working taxonomy, which we can see on our screen here. I'm going to go through each of them individually. First of all is economic harm. So if you identify a threat, you need to also identify the harms. A typical example of economic harm is denied loans. For example, someone applying for a loan and it's been denied based on the personal data you have about him. Higher premiums, price discrimination, and so on. Next, you have reputational and social harms. This could be, for example, exposure, embarrassment, child speech, and the rest. Then you have physical harms, which could be things like location and contact data exposed online that then enables stalking or enabling domestic violence. So it's always important to kind of ask, what does this feature gives an abusive ex-partner, for example? To me, I found that in privacy threat hunting, it's a question that gives that actually helps in finding real issues. Next, you have autonomy. So this is manipulation and decision made about people without them actually knowing, right? It could be the system manipulating people to make a specific decision, or misleading them into making those unaware decisions. Next, you have, as another example of harm, you have discrimination. This is when sensitive attributes, or either real or inferred data driving on equal treatment, could be, for example, based on your race, based on your religion, which then drives on equal treatment. Lastly, you have psychological harm. This is the general burden of being watched, and the sense that humans generally feel that they are being surveilled. Now, here's the professional payoff. When you can say this linking threat enables so harm, for example, this linking threat enables economic harm to this specific user group, you win the prioritization debate, because it's no longer a harm, it's no longer a threat, but now a threat that is directly linked to a harm that you can clearly come out. Because generally when you just go and say it's a privacy risk, right, most of the time it doesn't get prioritized, and features don't get added to roadmap until you are actually able to name the harm in specific. Now, the Lindon framework is a combination of four steps. Step one, which I briefly mentioned earlier, but in step one, you identify your data flow diagram. This is where you bring in your board, you draw your entity, your external entities, processes, data stores, identify how data is flowing between them, and your trust boundary. At this stage, it's very important to actually draw a real representation of the system that you have in mind. Step 2, this is the heart of Lindon, and this is where most of the work is actually done. Elicit threats work every element and every flow against the 7 Lindon categories in the previous slide. So at this stage, based on what has been drawn on the data flow diagrams, we walk through every step and then try to bring out threats that matches to the Lindon categories. The framework generally offers threat trees, and there's a recent version of Lindon, which is Lindon Go, that I found to be very helpful in workshops. It also provides you card decks, so various card decks, which kind of makes it easy for you to walk through those threats and identify what the specific threat is based on the data flow diagram that you have. In step 3, this is where we prioritize after we've identified threats based on the way data is moving across the system. In step 3, we prioritize the likelihood and the impact. What's the worst that can happen, right? Based on this threat, what's the worst thing that can happen, and then make sure we have it documented. The goal of this is that no system is 100% perfect, right? So it's very important to prioritize the threat into likelihood and impact, so that we can know so that we can give a clear plan of what should be dealt with first before moving to the next. Now, step 4, this is where we mitigate. After we've mitigated, it could be applying redesign switches to how features are, how data is flowing, apply concept like minimization. It could be controls like encryption, like using pseudonymization, making sure that there are no use of dark patterns, or like I mentioned, consciously accept that threat the way it is. The most important thing here is every decision should be written down and owned, when owned, a a plan should be made on how that specific threat is going to be fixed. So with this Lindon, and especially when you use Lindon Go, instead of waiting for a full quarter to make privacy changes, you could easily, in a 90-minute workshop session, identify threats, identify fixes that needs to be done from a privacy point of view, prioritize those risks, and also have all necessary data recorded. Now we are going to walk the talk. So I introduce you to Stridewell. It's a walked example for the rest of this course. It's a fictional fitness and wellness app assembled from patterns that I've seen repeatedly in real system reviews. Now, how does the Stridewell application works? The user's phone collects GPS tracks. So as you can see on the first side where you have user, so it collects GPS traces, health metrics, including things like heart rate, cycle tracking, and so on. And also, we also have a feature where users can invite their friends, where the system has access to the device's address book. The mobile app syncs to the Stridewell API. Not sure if you can see my screen, if you can see my mouse. The StrideWell APIs stores everything in a primary database. What we've identified is that there is no TTL, and there's also a 7 years backup in this in the design that we have. And advertising SDK in the app receives ID, location, and events. A third-party analytics vendor also gets the raw event stream, including things like user ID. And for the Coach ML pipeline, this is an ML pipeline that trains on complete user history. The social field is public by design, so there's a social field which is public by default, and this batches shows as soon as the user is active. The dashed line, as you can see here, is our trust boundary, and everything in the red boxes are what is actually out of StrideWell's control. Now, study this diagram. It's very important to have a look at this diagram and understand how the data is flowing, as we are going to use it in the next couple of slides that is coming. So again, have a look at what the users can do. As you can see, the mobile application, you have the API, you have the database, and then the database is feeding data to the pipeline that trains on users' data history. You have the analytics vendor, you have the SDK third party that collects device location. Just looking at this, one of the things I can already flag out, for example, in the database is the TTL. You have the 7 years backup, you have data being sent to third party, you have so in the I'm not going to go much into how to thread hunt this, because I want you guys to do it yourself. And let's continue to the next slide. Yeah, this is time for you to do the work now. I want you all to pause this video here. Yes, I genuinely want you to pause it and thread modded StrideWell yourself. Now, the task you have is to take the data flow diagram which I showed earlier. You can take the video back, work each element and flow against all 7 Lindon categories which we discussed, and I want you to record at least a thread in the format, element, category, and thread, and also who is harmed and how is the person harmed. Score each of the harms that you've identified into low, medium, or high for likelihood and impact. Then pick your top 3. So out of the top 3 harms that you've identified out of the 8, sketch 1 mitigation for each. Now at this stage, the volume's bit polished, right? There's no wrong answers. I think the only thing actually is maybe you missing some, but there is generally no wrong answers. Use the harm taxonomy, which I showed you earlier, to name who gets hurt. For example, economic harm, psychological harm. And when you're stuck, don't forget to use my favorite unblocking question. What does this feature give a stalker? Or does this feature give an insurer? Or does this feature give an employee? I advise you to spend 30 to 40 minutes on this exercise. I've also attached the worksheet template in the module resources. So when you've written yours down in the worksheet template, and only then come back to this video for the brief. Welcome back. Here's a sample of what a Lindon pass finds. Compare this against the list that you have. Starting from linking, The SDK joins device ID plus location with its data from other application. And this cross-app profile, Stridewell actually never sees it. Next, you have identifying. This is for the threads. One of the threads here is public running routes that start and end at home, identifying people trivially. And that's actually a physical safety issue, not just a theoretical one, because we are able to easily identify people homes. Next, detecting. Cycle tracking usage visibility to the analytics vendor as event names, because the analytics vendor is actually able to track all this. And then look at this as like special category data, or even inference of data that could easily be classified special category, which we discussed in module 3. Disclosure. The address book upload process, the address book upload processes non-users data. So users who never actually agreed to processing your data, to agree to anything, we are actually processing their data. The next, you have non-repudiation. Immutable streak history proves location. So think of things like abusive partners, for example. Unawareness. The public by default and the batch timing, because profiles are being set to public by default even when users are not aware of this. And non-compliance actually runs underneath everything, right? For example, no TTL, 7 years backup, which means there's no storage limitation. If you found thread I didn't list, that's excellent, because that's the whole point. The framework makes the hunt exhaustive, not identical. So two people may conduct a threat impact on a specific data flow or system, and not maybe generally find identical threats. Okay, now that we've got a threat list, we have the threat list which we did in our exercise. Now we need to prioritize it. So we need to make it a priority list. A 3x3 likelihood times impact matrix is genuinely enough. It's a simple model that everyone usually understands, and it beats most of the sophisticated one that nobody actually uses. 4 rules generally would make the scoring honest. The first is to impact means harm to the person, and this is scored first. And the next, you have company risk, which is real but it's kind of secondary, and mixing impact to persons and impact to company kind of corrupts the whole exercise, as our focus is impacts to person. Second, likelihood isn't just hackers. It could be motivated insiders. It could be data hungry vendors, and scraping, for example, are often more likely than a data breach. Third, special category data or vulnerable users racket impact up a level automatically. Fourth, record the rationale next to every score. For example, a bear high means nothing in 6 months. So top right cell act now, that's your mitigation backlog round. Now let's connect the craft to the legal instrument. Article 35 requires a data protection impact assessment when processing is likely to result in high risk. With some of the name triggers like systematic profiling with significant effect, large-scale special data category or special category data, systematic public monitoring, regulators like the ICOs that add tracking, matching, and invisible processing to high risk. So Stridewell ticks at least two. And here's actually why this module matters. Look at the data protection impact assessment anatomy. Describe the, if you look at describe the processing, your data flow map, your data flow diagram and data map slot straight in. Assess necessity and risk to individual. The section in your that's the section in your Lindon output. Mitigation measures, this is your prioritized list. Conclusion and sign off. Here you consult the regulator if high residual risk remain. Now, a data protection impact assessment written without a threat modeling is just creative writing, right? Because it's not really doing anything. You now know how to produce a threat impact assessment. And now, to continue into creating the DPIA, you can move on to your modules like OneTrust or other tools which you have that automates the workflow to help you document your findings and what has been identified. The last mile, this is where most threat models die. Findings must become backlog items. 4 mitigation moves, each shown with a Stridewell flavored ticket. Redesign kills the threat structurally. For example, coercing GPS before storage, fuse route start and end point by default. Minimize reduces the data in play. For example, you can pseudonymize IDs and a curated event allow list to the analytics to the analytics vendor instead of the raw stream that is being sent. Controls, here we add guardrails, for example, hashed contact tokens pushed in 24 hours instead of storing the whole address book. And lastly, accept is legitimate when it's documented, owned, time boxed. For example, the batch timing thread says the product owner signs it, and this is then revisited, for example, let's say quarterly. Notice the phrasing. Each mitigation is written as an acceptance criterion an engineer can implement and a reviewer can verify. A threat that never becomes a ticket was never really found. Now, what to carry forward from this module? I know it's been a very technical module, and Lindon is a concept that most of us or most of the listeners will just be hearing for the first time. So I encourage you all to practice what we've discussed. If you go on Lindon's website, there are actually real life examples that you can walk through and see just to make yourself more fluent. And again, like I mentioned, practice makes perfect. 4 key takeaways that I have from this module is: 1, threat modeling is 4 discipline questions, and Lindon's 7 categories turn the privacy horns from intuition into method. Secondly, name the harm. It is very important to name the harm. For example, if you say this enables stalking, this quickly helps you in winning the argument that privacy risk generally loses. Number 3, score harm to people first, then record your rationale and keep the matrix simple enough to survive contact with real systems. Number 4, the DPI is your threat model in legal dress, and a finding that never becomes a ticket was never really found. Keep your exercise 1 worksheet. You'll extend this exact threat model in the capstone project that we're going to have. Next, in module 5, we move from finding risks to building the fixes. We'll talk about privacy design patterns, consent engineering, and retention and deletion that actually runs. See you there.